even the greatest stuff becomes tedious. Like, even if you're getting fantastic shows, essentially it's a bit of rinse and repeat after a certain point.
Welcome to The Naked Texture Artist. On this podcast, I have deep and honest conversations with visual effects and animation veterans about their challenges and growth as working artists. My name is Mark-Pierre Sondergaard, and I'll be your host. Let's get started. If you already listened to my first episode with Chris Nichols, you know what a huge fan I am of him as a person, as well as his work as a texture artist. This episode is even better. Man, as a geek and as an artist, I just get so excited listening to this. Two artists shooting the breeze and geeking out over cool art stuff. Chris openly shares the difficult moments he's had since his massive achievement of painting the textures for Thanos. I point blank ask him, would your life have been better if you hadn't had this massive success? As beginners or outsiders, we might think that being a texture artist, or any kind of artist at the top of your game, is a bed of roses. But behind the curtain, there are of course new sets of problems to deal with. We talk about what it's like to go from painting the textures of Thanos to being unemployed. Yeah, that blew my mind too. And Chris geeks out about how he has personally been inspired by the cool inventions and innovations of pioneers like Gino Acevedo, and how the Lord of the Rings trilogy impacted his life and ambitions. You already know I'm a fan of Chris, and I know you will be too. So let's get to it. But I'm thinking, so 18 years in, what does that feel like? I'm about 12 years in now, and I'm sort of thinking,
Yeah.
what's 15 years going to feel like? What's 18 going to feel like? What's 20 going to feel like?
Well, I mean, I sort of hit a bit of a wall, I would say, probably this year, in fact.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, just this past month, I haven't worked at all. Like, I got laid off from my last job, which was I was a character texture surfacer at a game studio. It was a startup, and unfortunately, things didn't go so well there. And found myself for the first time in like 17 years without full-time work, without any sort of safety net. I didn't have a job that was lined up, and it's also a strange time in the industry right now, where it's definitely not an artist market.
No, I feel everything is constricting, so to speak, right now. Yeah,
Yes,
contracting. Yeah, that's the right word.
exactly.
Everybody's trimming 5, 7, maybe 20% staff. All studios that I know of.
Yeah, exactly. So there's like a multitude of things going on in the industry right now. One of them is a writer's strike. I think there was a director's strike as well, possibly. Maybe that got averted, but anyway, there's a bit of a hold on most projects in Hollywood at the moment. So as a result, that means studios are sort of tightening their belts. So a really bad time to get let go. And I definitely went through a bit of a crisis, I would say, like just existential.
Just sounds so it sounds so funny saying this. I feel like for me as a texture artist that I really love my craft and all this, you're one of my heroes.
Mm.
You know, I have sort of like this Hall of Fame list of working texture artists today. You're one of them.
Oh, thank you.
And I'm just like how bananas it is that the guy that painted Thanos like broke the mold, you know, unemployed. How I feel like I was like, here, have my job. I mean, never mind. But I feel like I'm so far down that pecking
Mm.
order. I was like, it doesn't make any sense.
Well, I mean, I definitely spoke to a lot of studios, but I'm just saying like the offers just weren't that great, you know? Like you sort of get to a point where you have a certain standard of living and you expect a certain rate, and also you don't want to just take any job that's offered to you. You know, it's very different from when you're starting out. You're
Yeah,
just like, well, I need to sort of, just get some
yeah.
experience or whatever. You'll sort of take whatever and it'll be great. but I obviously am a little bit more choosy with what I want. I want to pick something that is going to propel me into the trajectory I want to go into. So I've definitely talked to a lot of studios, and at the moment I'm just about to start like a just a month contract, just helping out on some creature work. But yeah, I'm still sort of at the moment just looking for the next opportunity. But I feel much better about it now than I did like 4 weeks ago. I would say
Oh, yeah.
I definitely had a moment where I was just like, oh, where's my career going right now? I don't really know. It's so strange, it just happened so suddenly, and I hadn't prepared for this. And even though I'm completely fine, and there was a payout, and I'm not financially in dire straits or anything like that.
Firstly, thank you so much to Chris for sharing his experiences so openly and honestly. I mean, this is clearly painful for him, but for all of us listening, there are so many valuable lessons. When you start out, breaking in can be so hard. It is so hard to make anybody take a chance on you when you have no experience and no real skills. You're unproven. And from that position, you marvel at the more seasoned artists. To you, they may seem to live a charmed life where gigs and money and respect and cool assets or cool shots are just falling into their laps. You think you'll eventually reach a state of bulletproof safety. You're going to be like them, or so it looks to you when you look at the senior artists around you. A word of warning. As a junior in visual effects, I quickly learned to sleep with one eye open. I've tried 2 studio bankruptcies, 1 failed merger. I've been fired once under, to me, quite unfair circumstances. So you quickly learn you can't trust any contracts nor any promises from studios. And this is not me being vindictive or scornful, because I'm the first one to really, really want to believe that this time it'll be different. But that's not the world we live in as working artists. And there's not much point crying over it. Instead, you gotta start developing contingency plans, as you're only ever as good as your options. I learned that early in my career. But as your career progresses, some things have become easier over time. So you wonder, what will it be like further out when you pass that point where Chris is? Please also notice how managing the progress of your career gets harder and harder, paradoxically, as you succeed. As the options simply become fewer and fewer, the better you get. It's like exercising in the gym. You want to keep challenging yourself, so you keep growing as an artist. And in this fictional gym, there are plenty of 10-pound dumbbells. And that's great in the beginning, but they will not challenge you forever. Then you move on to 20-pound dumbbells, of which there are still many of, but fewer. And there's even fewer of the 30-pound weights, and so on and so on. So what do? How can you keep your focus on challenging yourself if the, let's say, 100-pound weights are not available? Or do you just accept a lesser, non-challenging job because you gotta pay your bills? It's not an easy decision to make, and it gets harder and harder the further you get in your career.
I think it's just like, well, where am I going?
Yeah.
It's not as obvious as you might think
I mean,
to have a set goal in mind.
one, what should we say, us men, it's hard for us to feel good about ourselves just sitting on the couch. You need to feel I'm doing
Mm,
something, I'm useful, I'm tight, something that's connected to your purpose on some level. It's very hard to just, even if you have money in the bank and all the rest of it is paid for, that's got to be hard in any case.
yeah.
Do you, sorry, just playing devil's advocate here, would you have had an easier life if it hadn't been for Thanos? Let's say you hadn't climbed Mount Everest, and then you
Mm.
wouldn't have taken such a big jump forward in, what should we say, your own sense of quality of, this is where I need to surpass this bar, or at least reach this level, you'd
Um,
still be happy just texturing a background building then, you know?
I don't really know. Like for me, texturing is something I more fell into.
Okay.
I sort of came up wanting to be a character artist. That was how I started out. Like before I had to sort of pick a side, which ended up being textures. I much preferred to model my stuff and then texture it.
Right.
But in the film industry, it's you can do that. There's definitely roles in most studios where those roles exist, but you're gonna burn out a lot quicker because in film everything gets scrutinized so much. You may be redoing things several times over, and so if you're modeling and texturing something, it becomes a lot to handle, especially if you're working on 3 or 4 assets on a show.
Yeah.
So for Thor, I was doing a lot of modeling and texturing on the first Thor film, and I was really enjoying it. But by the end, I was so burnt out because I was having to manage topology, sculpt changes, textures, UV stuff. It's just like it was so hectic. Um, and I reluctantly chose to go into texturing just because for my own sanity, and I just couldn't sustain that level of stress for so long. But I feel like with the Thanos stuff, um, yes, in a way, like actually, when I got to the digital domain, I had a small crisis too, because all of a sudden I didn't need to do personal work. Like I sort of reached that point where the work I was doing at work was so satisfying and so high caliber that it seemed pointless to work on personal projects.
That's very
Um,
interesting. But why
and
would that form a crisis? Why would that produce a small crisis?
um, I think it's anything where you're facing a change, or at least for me,
Right.
um, it's I guess you're sort of it's a part of yourself that you're letting go. It's part of your old self, and you've sort of you shed that skin, and you're like something else. You've metamorphosed into something else, and so there's a little bit of there's a scary factor in that.
Yeah.
It's thrilling, but at the same time, it's sort of like complicated.
You're little
I feel like I'm tearing up. I don't know why, but
little bit of grief, sort of, for your former self identity, or what should we
I
say?
think so. Yeah, because I think like I look back at that person with a bit of pity, just because I put so much work and hard work and a lot of sacrifice into getting there, and so you sort of like you're glad that you've reached that point, but you're also like you're waving goodbye to that person in a way.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. That's interesting. Yeah, so it's sort of like a coming of age kind of thing, where you're moving from one age or stage in life to another. Loss of innocence, isn't that what they call it? Or
Yeah, it's a transitional period. Yeah, absolutely. It's very similar from when you go from high school to university or something like that, where it's similar but it's different.
yeah. So 18 years in now, if I can summarize, and please, push back on this, succeeding becomes harder and harder. Would you agree with that? As in, to keep producing successes that are greater and greater, sort of as a in a progression, becomes harder and harder the further you go.
Well, I think your options increase. That's one of the good things. You've done the hard work, you proved yourself, you have a portfolio to fall back on. You're a known quantity at that point, and so you can sort of forge your own path in a way. Opportunities open that weren't there before. The thing is, in visual effects, the the progression, if you want to keep going up the ladder, is you tend to become more of a manager.
Yeah.
Even when I was a lead, I would spend more time in meetings, um, doing bidding, that sort of thing, trying to interview team members, which has its own like rewards, it is enjoyable in some way, but you're not spending near as much time on the box
No,
exploring
you,
and
you're not being
enjoying that
you're not
process.
being Frank Frazetta there. I'm sorry. You know, it's
Yeah, you're being his business manager more.
yeah,
And so and in visual effects, my trajectory would be CG supervisor next or asset supervisor. Um, and eventually you get to the top of the food chain, the top of the pecking order is visual effects supervisor. And it's just not something I've ever really been interested in. I enjoy the leadership aspect, especially when you've got a really great, enthusiastic team. Um, Forging, like new paths and trying out new technology and trying to push things. That's a really fun part of the job. But I mean, it does. Even the greatest stuff becomes tedious. Like even if you're getting fantastic shows, essentially it's a bit of rinse and repeat after a certain point.
yeah.
So that's why I was sort of like looking for new avenues to start out in. That's why I wanted to switch over to concept art for a little
That
bit.
makes sense. I mean, you're not the first one that have told me this. Miriam Catherine, that was the lead on Smaug the Dragon in The Hobbit, she says exactly the same thing. That sort of once you've climbed that mountain of technical excellence in the texture field, you just simply need a new challenge, an intellectual challenge. You need something instead of just climb Mount Everest for the 10th time and the 20th time. You need something new, something to stimulate you.
Yeah,
And
yeah, absolutely. And I think there's always been those like lightning strike moments in my career. I would say the first one was probably watching the Lord of the Rings trilogy. Those 3 years where a new Lord of the Rings movie was coming out
oh
every
yeah,
year.
oh yeah,
The first time I knew it was going to be great, and it was way better than I ever expected. This is like 2001, so a
yeah,
long time ago
yeah.
now. But I mean, watching those movies completely changed my life. That was when I had that moment where I was like, okay, that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to work and become a creature artist so I can do stuff like the Balrog or
The cave troll.
um, with Gollum actually was the one that
Really? Gollum?
blew my socks off.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I mean, and I became obsessed with that movie, like watching all the behind the scenes stuff, as many of our generation did.
Yeah.
Um,
I'd
and
imagine you
then
have the books as well, the art books with all the
yeah, the art
gorgeous,
books, the
gorgeous
extended DVDs.
concept art.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it really, really was an artist film, and so that was really what set me on my path. And people like Gino Acevedo, who was at the time he was the texture supervisor at Weta Digital, and I mean, have you ever heard of him before?
I don't think so.
Oh,
I'm
he's
sort of on a quest to find out who painted the textures for the cave troll. But there are other creatures in there in the first three
yeah.
films. I wonder who. But
Well, I mean, from what I can gather, I don't know a lot about that texture team back then. I've met a few of them.
yeah.
I've worked with a few of them. But I mean, Gino was the one that he was an interesting character because Gino had come from the makeup effects department.
Okay.
He'd been hired to oversee the prosthetics of the Lord of the Rings. And
So he
as far as I
sort
can
of like a
gather,
Stan Winston kind of guy that's just turning
sure.
digital.
Yeah, and he'd already had a 20 plus year career at that point. He'd worked on like Aliens,
Wow.
what like Wolf, like he had all these fantastic prosthetic creature films under his belt from working in Hollywood as a makeup artist, like yeah, like a Stan Winston style artist. And so when he was overseeing prosthetics at Weta, I guess that they were having a hard time nailing Gollum. They were trying to get the right translucency, and so he brought a lot of that experience over from the practical to the digital side, and that was the turning point for Gollum as the story is told. Now I don't know the real story, but that is the one that is on the behind the scenes DVD features.
Cool.
Um, but he's been a massive influence to me, and everybody that's worked with Gino talks about him like he's the most incredible person ever. And unfortunately, I've never gotten to work with him. I'd love if you got him on this podcast
I'm
because
good.
he seems like a lovely
I'm
guy.
literally writing down his name right now. All right, Gino Acevedo.
Yeah, so that's, I believe it's Miriam's boss.
There you are. It's a small
Yeah.
world, huh? Well,
Yeah, but he was probably been the most influential, like definitely my North Star in this industry for the last 18 years, I would say.
how do you keep track of his work? Just sort of to see
Well,
the.
he every single weather project, he's the guy that's oversees the creature stuff. Like that is his bread and butter.
Okay.
And I believe he's probably friends with Peter Jackson and got the full trust of the studio. He's been there for so long. He I don't know what his official role is now. I think it's like a creature art director or something like that. But Avatar, like he's the one that pushed technology more than any other texture painter.
A little note here. You probably heard me say before, or if not, you'll no doubt hear me say so many times in the future. How to be a good and successful artist, you need to know so much more than just mouse clicks and functions in a given software package. This part of the conversation, where Chris is geeking out over one of his art heroes, there are a lot of interesting learnings to take away from that. Do you notice how Gino Acevedo was able to take the quality of the digital work forward in an enormous leap, not by a digital solution as such, but by using tools from the physical world? I think it's a beautiful example of how our work at the end of the day is so much more than just mouse clicks. This is why I'm sure your teachers or other experienced artists around you have been telling you to learn the fundamentals of the old traditional world, such as anatomy, perspective, color theory, etc., etc. And maybe compared with your immediate needs to learn function XYZ in whatever software package you're working in, it probably seems boring and unimportant. Like your parents telling you to brush your teeth or eat your vegetables. But the truth is that simply just learning the software has a very low ceiling for how cool the stuff you can do will be. To be able to answer that fundamental question of why does this not look right? Or what does this look still need in order to function? You need to be able to understand how all the art fundamentals govern and influence the work we do. And this is not just an isolated incident. Over in my conversations with Miriam Catherine, we also touched upon this. So, eat your vegetables and brush your teeth. You'll thank me later.
A big thing for me, like right now, we're in this amazing world of skin scans,
Yeah.
texturing XYZ, surface mimic.
Yeah.
That's all because of Gino. Gino was the brainchild behind all of that.
Huh.
What he like he came up with this brilliant idea to get high fidelity skin detail. Say like on the back of a hand, you've got, amazing skin wrinkles, very fine high fidelity stuff. He came up with the idea of putting a layer, taking a cast, like a plaster cast of a hand, and then laying a thin layer of a silicon rubber on the top, then peeling it off like a skin, cutting it out, unfolding it like a UV, and scanning that,
Of course.
turning it into a grayscale map, leveling it, and using that as a surface displacement.
It's amazing how I can hear here you describing this technique. It's an incredibly physical world technique. And him coming from a physical career already makes him sort of understand the physical world. Whereas, let's say, me coming from a completely digital world, I would never think of the physical world. Let me try and pull something in from the physical world. I'm trying to think of a digital solution to my problems because that's my bread and butter. Do you know? It's that's amazing having a person that can straddle both worlds and combine
Yeah.
both sort of, yeah.
And I think like that when I heard that on a podcast, he described that. I was so excited about that process. I tried to replicate it myself, and I had terrible results because I was getting bubbles in the silicon. I didn't know what I was doing,
Oh boy.
and I didn't have a direct access to Gino, but I was working with an artist called Bradford DeCosson, who he's a ILM, or he was an ILM texture supervisor, but he was at Weta when this technique was being pioneered. He was working on Avatar, and he told me a little bit more about how the process worked. Like apparently with the scanner, we're talking about a flatbed scanner
Oh
that you
yeah,
would
yeah, yeah,
scan a document. They would fill it with an inch of baby oil so that it would diffuse all the reflections, so there
yeah.
wouldn't be any
Of course, that
reflections.
makes sense.
It's so
You would
clever,
have it
right?
evenly lit, like things are under the water.
Yes. So you're getting like a polarized effect
Huh.
because of the baby oil. And the baby oil, because it's not water, obviously, it's not going to damage the electrical stuff. So I did that technique. I bought like a flatbed scanner. I set up like a barrier, put the baby oil on. Super messy, but it worked. And I think it was Jack the Giant Slayer. I think that was the first show that I was like actually doing a whole process of doing this silicon process, and finally I figured out how to get rid of the bubbles. I had to get a tank that basically sucks all the air out of it and just leaves the silicon, so you're degassing it.
Wow.
um, it's a massive amount of work with very little information. And then I got to talk to a guy that was starting Surface Mimic that was sort of doing the same thing, but he was completely circumventing the scanning process. And instead, he was taking photogrammetry sort of style photographs and then recreating it using normals, which is way more cleaner than having to like scan a 2D silicon.
I gotta say, I'm getting all just nostalgic, and I'm tearing up here because I'm thinking those crazy days of Wild West sort of frontier living, pioneering, breaking frontiers, and figuring things out. My goodness! And then I'm comparing with how, I don't know. I'm just thinking about the last couple of shows I've been through where everything is just rush, rush, rush. You get a quick, you get 24 photos taken in a photo booth, and then some poor technology that maps it onto a piece of geometry, and it neither fits nor it doesn't or whatever. And you're just okay, paint in the seams, and there you are, and there's your creature.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
and all done in no time, of course. And it's just a different world together, altogether. These days, visual effects production.
yeah. Unfortunately, I mean that's the way things are going, right? The more ubiquitous things become, the more streamlined the process is, and it just loses its edge. And I think if you're a creative person, that's why it's important to kind of keep looking out there for what the next frontier is and try to position yourself to take advantage of that if you can.
Yeah, yeah. What is the next frontier? AI?
Uh, I would say it's, I think everything is converging at the moment with AI, and I think Apple's about to open up VR in a big way again next year with their headset.
Yeah.
I honestly think, and also, of course, Meta, like the metaverse stuff, that it's been a bit of a failure, but it's not going to go away. It's going to come back in version 2 or 3. But I mean, I think if you can, it would be great to get involved in a project where you're building your own metaverse, even if it's a 10-year procedure. This is why I'm like trying to get really fundamentally up close and personal with Unreal Engine, and sort of switching my skill sets over to more of the real time side, because I think that like metaverse stuff is going to be really big in the next 10 years, not maybe not even that long. But I mean, the ability to create your own virtual ecosystem is something that really thrills me. If I can create my own creatures, my own fauna, my, a place that you can come and visit and see my creations, I feel like that would be really satisfying.
Yeah, yeah, I can see that. And then I guess we're full circle. Now you're back to creatures again,
Yeah.
just in a slightly different way. It's an interesting thing what you were saying before, by the way, that you see you're not so much a texture artist as in that's just one of the tools in your creature toolbox, so to speak. You know, along with modeling, sculpting, and so on and so forth. You also mentioned burnout. Chris Nichols will be back in a future episode. Thanks for spending a little bit of your day with us. We have a tiny bit of housekeeping to do on the way out. If this episode has been helpful to you, why not share the podcast with your colleagues and friends? If you'd like to support the podcast, I'd appreciate if you bought me a coffee. You can do that on Ko-fi. That is spelled ko-fi.com/The Naked Texture Artist. One word. If you have suggestions, comments, or questions, I'd love to hear them. Feel free to drop me a line on thenakedtextureartist@gmail.com. That is the Naked Texture Artist written out in all one word @gmail.com. As I mentioned, having a busy day job in visual effects means my release schedule for this podcast can be a bit irregular. So if you don't want to miss out, subscribe to The Naked Texture Artist wherever you get your podcasts. Or follow the podcast on the socials, then you'll be alerted when the next episode drops. The music in this episode was Awake by Tycho. Nick Sifoni helped put the sound together, and everything else was done by me, your host, Mark Pierre Sondergaard. Speak to you soon.